All right, so let's begin. So first off, thanks so much for being willing to do this interview.
Yeah, no problem. Nice to meet with you, David, and see you
Yeah,
again.
yeah. It was really fascinating hearing or getting kind of a glimpse of your career change when you were in that seminar. So looking forward to hearing more of the story, and definitely know it'll be a story that'll be helpful to others. So maybe just to kind of start us off, if you could just describe what your current position is and a little bit about like what do you do? What's like
Okay.
what are typical days for you, et cetera.
Okay. So currently I'm a senior producer for UNH Extension, and that is a marketing and communications role. And at this point, my position is about 60% graphic design, and I think it's like 25% social media, and then there's a little bit of extra time for, admin purposes, things like that. So currently a lot of my job is graphic design. I'm actually hoping to move in the future fully toward graphic design. But right now I do manage a small social media team, and I sort of oversee their work. I was doing all the social media myself, but now they're doing it. And then day to day, it's just really a lot of graphic design projects coming in from what are sort of like my clients, which is our staff, and we have various programs. So it's really a variety of different topic areas and stuff that I'm doing design for, which is keeps it interesting. So
Cool. And so can you give an example or like a handful of examples of projects you've done graphic design for? Like what are the projects or products?
sure.
You know,
So I've done magazine design for a couple different magazines. We have Radius magazine, which is an annual magazine that Extension produces. It's a 36-page magazine. And then I've also done the design for Spark, which is UNH's research magazine. Just started doing that one last year, and I'm going to actually be doing that one again. I also do infographics, reports, um, custom graphics such as graphics for kids. So I work with 4-H, which is part of Extension, and do some graphics for kids, which is really fun. I used to work more on social media graphics, not as much now, but that was part of my job in the past. So all kinds of different things, flyers, posters. I'm trying to think of crazy things like a tent banner that I created at one point. Um, I don't know. There's been a variety of different things. Of course, like they're not coming to mind right now, but lots of different things. It's fun.
all right. And actually, for people who are interested in the marketing field or communications, and then maybe specifically graphic design, besides design skills, like what are the skills that make somebody effective and, you know, you should have if you want to be in this field?
So I would definitely say organization is really great. There's a lot of files that you're dealing with. So being able to know where your files are and make sure that you're sharing them with the clients. Project management is really key because you're essentially managing the whole process unless there is an outside project manager that is overseeing the project, which does sometimes happen. But for me, generally, I'm managing all the project myself. So keeping communications open with the person that you're working with, accepting feedback is really important. Also, time management is another important thing, like kind of making sure that you're getting your projects done on time, and that you're, getting them back to the client in a reasonable manner, especially if they have like a specific deadline that they need. So there's definitely a lot of skills outside of that. I would say communication, as I mentioned before, is a really big one. So being able to write effectively is really good as well. One of the things that's kind of big in graphic design is information hierarchy. So kind of making sure that when somebody sends you a document, let's say it's not good information hierarchy, you have to kind of go through and see like what content would be good for a sidebar, what content is prominent on the page, what headers do I use, and what are the levels of the headers that I use to make sure that this information is easy for someone to understand. Um, so kind of having a handle on all those different things, I think is really important for the field.
Cool. And I imagine like under the heading of communication, I could imagine asking really good questions because oftentimes people are pretty unclear about what they want. So I
Yes.
imagine you have to be good at that.
Yes, whenever I send an email to anybody that I'm working with, I usually start off with a bunch of questions. Is this going to be a print project? Are you going to print it in-house? Who's the audience for this project? What photos do you have? What logos do I need? What text? Just a bunch of, yeah, start off questions to really dig into what they're trying to accomplish.
And how do you navigate when your client says they want X, but you have a sense of Y would better meet their needs, or they think they have a design sense and they don't? Like, any thoughts about how you navigate that, and just to, again, to give people an idea of what, some of the nuances of the field?
Right. Yeah. A lot of times people have ideas for things that don't sometimes don't look good, let's say. So sometimes you do have to deliver sort of feedback to them on like, either why this idea won't work, or another idea that you think would work better than their initial concept. And a lot of times I think, you can't just state that it's your opinion. Like, well, I just think that's no good and I think this is good. You have to really dig into why. And so bringing in sort of those design principles into it, and thinking about their audience and how it's going to be used. So bringing in a lot of those things can really kind of sway them to consider it differently and to maybe consider the design option that you're suggesting instead. So I would say there's some persuasion, I guess, in kind of being able to convince people to see sort of your point of view on the subject. And I think it also kind of shows your expertise in something when you're able to kind of give them reasons why you think it's a good idea. For example, a lot of people are used to seeing a Word document with the text running all across the page. And that really isn't the best way for people to read. A Word document is far too wide. If you think about like a novel or something, they're a lot narrower. So putting your text into columns is usually a good idea because it's much easier to read. So just saying to somebody, well, no, I don't think that looks good isn't going to cut it. But if you tell them like, this is easier for people to read, they're going to take in the information easier. They're not going to feel overwhelmed by a huge block of text. So there's just a lot of ways that you can sort of convince them with some of the principles of design. So.
All right. So, helpful overview of your work and what it entails. How about if we get into your career story, and as part of that, the career change that you've made? So, can you start us just what you majored in college and then where you went from there?
Sure. So I graduated from UNH back in 2004, and my degree was in English. While in high school and college, I took a lot of art classes, but in college, I decided that probably wasn't the route that I wanted to take for a career, only because I didn't really know how I was going to make money doing that. And so I kind of focused a little bit more on the writing side of things, which was also, a creative outlet for me as well. And to be honest, when I graduated, I didn't know what I was going to do for a career. I have always had anxiety, so that kind of played into what positions I was willing to think about. And so I was offered a position by my boyfriend at the time, his aunt, to work as a realtor's assistant, which was sort of like an administrative assistant position. There was occasionally some creative aspects to it, but a lot of it was paperwork, and dealing with, all the various scheduling things that need to happen for a realtor. So that was sort of my first foray into the job world. And I got to say, people nowadays doing internships, learning about careers ahead of time, super important thing to do. Not something that I did. So
Yeah, really good point, because you don't know what the day to day is until you do it. So anything remotely close to actually doing that job, so important. Or, like I say, remotely close, like a junior version of it, like an internship. So you're being an admin, not exactly loving it. And then what happens?
So from there, my mom actually convinced me to come work at UNH, which I've been at since 2006, or USNH, I should say, because I briefly had a stint at a different institution. That's later. But so my mom was working at UNH. She said, come work at UNH. She said, the benefits are great. You'll like it. So I got a job at UNH in the Alumni Association, and it was really a data entry job. And I don't think I fully grasped that at the time. And I was very unhappy. I ended up being very unhappy with that position. I was in it for about 2 years, and I'm just really, as a creative person, just not cut out for sitting there doing data entry all day long. So that was definitely the beginning of a turning point. Not, I wasn't really there yet, but I was starting to realize that, well, for one thing, I'm getting things out of the way that I don't like. So after that position, I moved to the Thompson School at UNH as an administrative assistant 2. And while I was there, I was moved to an administrative assistant 3. And that job was actually the job where I started doing some marketing. And that's where I began to realize that that was something that I was really interested in. So there I was, creating posters and flyers for them. I started their Facebook page. I updated their website. And through working there, I realized that I wanted to improve those skills. So I went to UNH's Professional Development and Training, which we both know so well, and got 2 certificates from them, one in graphic design. At the time, they were calling it desktop publishing, and then the other in web development. So I really was starting to be really interested in this, wanting to grow my skills. I was using Photoshop more. I started getting into InDesign and doing layout for posters and things. And I did have some sort of successful things that I created that while I was there. There was one that was like a water tumbler. I did a little design for that, and that was printed. And there was a huge poster that I did that was hanging outside the train station at UNH. And actually, it's still there right now, which this was like back in like 2009, probably. It's still there. Even though the Thompson School doesn't really exist as it used to. Eventually, I'm assuming they're taking that poster down, but that was one of my first really big format design projects that was super fun to complete. So I also at the time started doing little freelance projects. I had a photographer friend who I worked with. She wanted business cards, she wanted a logo, she wanted all kinds of things. And so we did a bunch of projects together, and I just really started to grow those skills.
And actually, if we could stop for a second. So you did kind of a combination of getting some certifications, so some formal education, and then talking with your manager to get opportunities to use these skills. Like, did you have to sort of negotiate for that or request that? How did you
I
get
did
this?
with the Facebook page, I think, because they didn't have one. So it was like me starting a Facebook page, and they had to be kind of okay with me doing that. But there were actually projects in that position that were sort of marketing and design related that were naturally part of it anyway, especially the website was a big part of it. And then once they kind of realized that I was interested in graphic design, they sort of, anything that we could do that, they would talk to me about it. And so I would make it happen. So I sort of became known as enjoying that kind of work and also being good at it. And so I think that projects sort of naturally came. I didn't necessarily have to ask for it, that I can remember anyway.
Oh, great. Okay. And then you sort of did some side gig things to add to your portfolio and experience. Yeah. Awesome. Um, okay. Looking at my questions here, obviously. You're answering all these without me asking directly. Um, well, let's go. And then what happened? Let's
I
do
know,
then
right?
what happened.
Go through time.
Uh,
So I, at the time, started applying for some marketing jobs, but I wasn't having any luck. I don't even really remember that I even had any interviews at that time. And then after I'd been at the Thompson School a little over 4 years, a position came up at UNH that was a senior administrative assistant position. And so I applied to it. I didn't really want to go in that direction, but I did want to make more money. So I applied, and the department ended up like really wanting me for the position. And I wasn't sure I really wanted the job, but they were so forceful about it. They were like, no, we really want you. This is what we're going to pay you. Like, you should come over. And so I did. And to be honest, that also was a job that I was really not very happy with. I was happier actually at the Thompson School because of the little marketing projects that I got to do. But in this new position, I really didn't have a lot of marketing tasks. It was much more administrative. And I also, in this position, had like a lot of different bosses, essentially, not true bosses, like not somebody who I actually reported to, but a lot of people asking me to do projects for them. And I just, I was very, very unhappy in that position. And I ended up being in that position for 4 years. So while I was there, I sort of started doing things in my own time, marketing related, to sort of scratch that itch. Um, so I continue with the graphic design, working on projects for that freelance. And then I also at the time started a blog and I wrote it and self-published a novel. So I was just really trying to work that writing into it because I wasn't really doing a lot of that. And I at the time I kind of thought that writing was like the future for me, that that's where I wanted to go. And I was desperately trying to gain myself experience. And I thought that by creating this blog and writing this novel that I would be able to sort of showcase some of the things that I had done. But to be honest, that also wasn't very successful in landing me jobs. So at this time, I also was just really trying to think like, what can I do? Because I'm applying for these positions and I'm not getting them. Occasionally I would have an interview, but I still wasn't landing the positions. It was always to me, like in my mind, like there was some superstar out there who they were always hiring. You know, there was somebody coming in with more experience, more this, more that. And I just wasn't able to land any of the jobs. So I also decided at the time to go back to get a second degree in digital and social media from Granite State College. And so this was like a second bachelor's degree, which I wasn't really sure it was a good idea, but I was like, well, it can't hurt. And I can take classes for free working at UNH. So I might as well try this. And while I was doing that, I ended up seeing an email come through that their career counselor, Jan Colville, was meeting with students and offering career advice. And I was like, oh, this is something I need. I need to go see Jan. So I went to see her and we had a couple meetings and she was like super helpful in describing to me some of the things that I needed to do. So one of the things was to gain experience, like real concrete experience in the real world through doing some volunteer like basically jobs essentially. So at the time I picked up two. I worked at Rochester Main Street. They needed a lot of different graphic design projects for posters, flyers, brochures, things like that. So I worked with them on a bunch of stuff. And then at the same time, I also started working for the marketing team at Granite State College, just as a volunteer. I wasn't paid or anything. It was sort of like an internship, but it wasn't officially an internship. And so for them, I was writing blogs for their website. So gaining this experience, which was really great. And then Jan let me know at the time, I'm going to be hiring a position that's going to be supporting me, and I think you'd be great for the job. And I was like, okay, that's really good. So I interviewed with her, and the good thing about the job was it was sort of like a bridge job for me, or a transition job, where partly it was administrative assistant tasks and partly it was marketing. And so I think my background was actually really well suited for the job. And so when I interviewed, like I really felt like I was able to play up both of my strengths as far as having some marketing experience and also having the administrative assistant experience that I had had in the past. So Jan ended up hiring me, and I worked for her, I think, for maybe like a year and 8 months, something like that. And then Granite State College had like a reorganization of their advising team and their career services teams. And so I ended up being promoted at that time, and my title changed. So my initial title was Career Services Coordinator. And then when they did the reorg, my new title was Communications Coordinator, and I went from hourly to salary. So that was actually a very big, good move for me because it finally gave me that legitimate like marketing sort of title that I was able to take into the future with me. And so I actually didn't stay at Granite State a ton longer. I want to say I was there for maybe 8 more months, something like that. And then I started looking because I was thinking, I want that real marketing job. Like what I was doing at Granite State College was good, but it wasn't fulfilling to me because it was a lot of writing, and I had actually discovered that writing wasn't my future. I didn't love doing it as a job, which funny, like, you think, okay, these are the things that I love, but sometimes certain things, once you're doing them for a job, you discover that it's not for you. So I really wanted to do social media. I wanted to do more with design. And so I applied to two different positions at UNH, and I actually interviewed for them within a week of each other. One of them was with UNH Extension, which is where I am now, and the other was with UNH's Health and Wellness Department. And I ended up getting an offer from Extension first, and the job actually paid more, and I was really interested in it. So I accepted, and that was a huge move for me. I was so excited. I was finally going to be doing the work that I really wanted to do. I was finally like officially hired into a marketing job after having an interview. So it was really, really fabulous for me. I couldn't even believe it was happening, just because I had been so unhappy for so long. And I was finally making the right moves. And now I've been at Extension for 4 years. And I would say throughout that time, I really kind of proved myself as far as particularly with design. And so I've been able to really grow my career in that direction, which has been really great.
That's awesome. And boy, what a great point about something you love and you think, well, naturally that's what I should do for a job, for a career, and discovering doing it day in and day out, it ends up not being a good fit. I
Yeah.
remember this is at a much lower level, but I remember when I was in college working for the school newspaper as a photographer, and that killed my love of photography for
Oh,
about a
no.
decade because I thought like I took pictures of what I love taking pictures of. And then for the school newspaper, it's like lots of pictures of like people accepting big checks and shaking hands, stuff that I had no interest in. And yeah, it took something that was a creative expression, just turned it into a grind for me. So, yeah, so interesting. Any thoughts about what it was for you from the going from writing as a side gig and a passion project to doing it as a full-time job that just didn't do it for you?
I think it's similar to what you just said, where doing it for myself, like creative writing for yourself is very different than writing for a business. So I would say if anybody's interested in doing writing or thinks they are, like actually do it for a business, like get a freelance job or do it for free for somebody and just understand what it takes to write for a business versus what it is to write your own thoughts and feelings. Like there's a lot of fulfillment, I think, in writing and freedom, I think, in writing your own thoughts and feelings, but when you come to, more formulaic writing, let's say, although even what I was doing wasn't, it was more blog writing. And a lot of it was actually about career stuff, which I was really interested in, which I think made it last a little bit longer for me than maybe it would have otherwise because I was interested in the topic. Particularly, because of my own journey, I was like, yes, this is good stuff. I want people to see this. But I just began to realize that it was almost too hard for me. Like I enjoyed it, but or I didn't like I kind of enjoyed it, but it was almost like pulling teeth in a sense. Like I just found like this is not fun. I don't enjoy trying to swap out words and figuring out what looks like what sounds best. And when I compared that to how I felt about graphic design, I was like, no, like graphic design is so much more interesting to me, so much more fun to me. Just it comes together more naturally for me, I feel like. So I just really started gravitating toward design. And the other thing that's interesting too is that once I got into Extension, I was managing social media full time, and or not full time for my job, but it was about 50% of my job. And I had thought ahead of time, like this is what I want to do. I want to do social media, but then after a couple years, I was burnt out. Like I couldn't do social media anymore, and I had lost the passion for it. And I think it's kind of common with social media because it kind of eats you alive in a sense because it's never done. Like you're just constantly feeding the monster, and it's always hungry. And I don't know. I just decided that it wasn't for me anymore. And at this point, I'm sort of at the place where I'm like, well, I don't want to put my time and energy into focusing on social media, into keeping up with what's happening on social because it's constantly changing. And it's the same in the field of graphic design. And it's like, I would much rather spend my time focusing on what's new in graphic design and learning more about design than I would on social. So I feel like your career can sometimes be like a funnel. Like you funnel down to like what is essentially going to work for you and what you truly enjoy doing.
Yeah. And getting more clear after you've been doing it a while, like, that doesn't work for me. But also it sounds like with social media that, something can be interesting to you and work for you for a while and until it doesn't. And it's like no harm, no foul. It's just you evolve and get clearer on what's right for you. Um, yeah. I'm curious, can you talk about more about like how you felt during the administrative assistant days when it just wasn't doing it for you, and any of the struggles or challenges around like, I think I'd really much rather be doing like the graphic design, but is it ever going to happen, or am I made for that, or like anything you want to share? Because as I'm sure you can gather, that's a real challenge for people doing career change. Like, I know I can do this thing, but it's not satisfying. Am I capable of doing this other thing, or is it too big of a leap? Anything that you want to share about that?
I mean, I'm sure other people will agree to how miserable it can be when you're doing a job that you don't enjoy. I don't know, it just got to be the point where everything irritated me about it. And like the whole idea of an admin is that you're helping people with things. And I would just get so frustrated. I'm like, I don't want to help you people with these things. Like, I don't care. I'm not interested. Like, you can do it yourself. Like, these are things you can do. Like, I think it also goes along with that profession of being an administrative assistant. They are so undervalued often. And they're looked down upon, I honestly think a lot. And I don't think that it's warranted. I think that they have like some really, really great skills. But I think historically it's been seen that, oh, well, you're just the secretary, like you just do filing and you type up things and whatever. And I think that can feel really terrible to a person who's in that role, especially if you don't really love it. I'm sure there are some people who do actually enjoy it. And so, maybe it gives them sort of an up feeling to be doing that job. Whereas like for me, I felt like I was being bossed around by everybody. I felt like everybody was in a higher position than me. It really felt horrible. And I did have those thoughts of like, can I do this other thing? Am I any good at it? I actually had a fairly horrible interview experience actually when I was at that last administrative assistant job, um, where I went for an interview for a marketing position. It was an assistant producer, so it was like a very entry level position. And it was kind of a weird position because they didn't really tell you what they wanted. They were just like, we want somebody who can do all these things. And I was like, well, I can do a bunch of different things. Like I can write and I can do graphic design or whatever. And I ended up thinking that I was going to get the job after the interview because they asked me for my references. So I thought, okay, this is a good sign. And then, a couple months went by, I didn't hear anything. And so I asked for some feedback, and it was not in a kind manner. It was just basically like, oh, well, you were kind of amateurish. And I think I'd also applied for an administrative assistant job there because I thought, well, if I'm in a marketing, like, department, like maybe I can move up or whatever, which probably would have been a bad thing to do. But that's what I thought at the time. And they said, and you weren't even really that qualified for the administrative assistant position. And I'm like, are you kidding? I'm a senior admin, like right now, like, which I'm glad that didn't work out because that probably wouldn't have been for the best. But I think that was a really bad thing to have happened for me because having somebody in the marketing field tell you that you're amateurish when you're just starting out is really not easy to hear. And it really dented my confidence for sure in being able to do the work. I had imagined in my head, like, other women in marketing are going to be so kind and nice to me. They're going to want to help me succeed, like, but there are certain people, I guess, in the field. I'm not encountering them now, but there are people in the field who are just not. I don't know if it was just there was stress going on behind the scenes. There might have been, and I don't know. It was just wasn't a great experience for me. So for sure, I was having those feelings of like, I'm an imposter. I can't really do this. I'm no good at this. But my answer to that generally was to just learn more about it. And so I do remember at the time I was taking some lynda.com classes as well. Now it's LinkedIn Learning, but back then it was lynda.com. So I was really trying to learn as much as I could about design and trying to learn about the programs that I was using, like Illustrator and InDesign. Because to me, that was like the best way to sort of combat that was, me feeling like, well, I don't know enough about these programs. They're huge, enormous programs. And, just wrapping your head around it is crazy. And, taking the time to sort of learn and get better over time, I think was the only thing that helped with that. I mean, to be honest, I still have imposter syndrome now, as I told you before. So it's not like that's something that has magically disappeared. But I would say it's better now than it used to be, that's for sure. So
Neat. And what kinds of things are you doing now to help you with that and to help you move your career forward in, in terms of like upskilling, getting more experience, like varied experiences? Like, yeah, what kind of stuff are you doing intentionally now?
So I'm definitely still using LinkedIn Learning. There's definitely a lot of good things on there to check out. I went to Adobe Max recently, which not in person. I just did it virtually, but it's Adobe's sort of conference that they have every year where they go over new things about the products, and there's people who teach you how to do things. So that was pretty cool. I think maybe the biggest thing that I've been trying to do is to basically say yes to every project that comes my way. And even those that are not specifically for me, like seeking them out and saying, like, I saw that this person needs help with this, like, I'm going to go do that. And I think that's really been the biggest thing. For example, the whole magazine design thing, which is what I'm like really passionate about, came about because in the past it had been outsourced, and then we decided, okay, we're going to try to keep it in-house. So for the first year that I was with Extension, somebody in our central marketing department did it, a graphic designer. And then the following year, I mentioned to my supervisor, you know what, I'd really like to try my hand at designing that magazine. And he was like, well, that's good. He's like, why don't you work together with the central marketing graphic designer and you can kind of both create it? And I was like, and you can learn from her. And I was like, that sounds amazing. I'd love to do that. And so then when the spring came and it was time to start thinking about the project, the woman who I was going to be working with let me know that she was retiring, and there was really nobody else over there that could help me. So it was my project. It was in my lap then, and I ran with it. I was just like, yes, this is mine. I can do whatever I want. I was very excited about it. And I absolutely loved it. It was a super great process. I feel like I really sort of found like my place almost with design, because I was like, this is so fun. I love everything about this.
Mm.
So at this point now I've done 4 magazines. So I'm slowly adding to my repertoire of magazines, so that hopefully eventually I'll have a really good portfolio of all the work that I've done. But I think sometimes you have to seek those kind of things out in your role, because I think sometimes people say, well, no, I'm too busy. I can't take on anything else. And that's never been my mindset, because I want to be known for graphic design. I want to get better at graphic design. So I'm going out and looking for those projects and I'm taking them on, kicking butt.
That's awesome. It certainly sounds it. That's great. So as you think about your career journey, so like words of wisdom for other people who are career changers. So one big one from this like last part of the interview about really being proactive, looking for opportunities, speaking up, and then shining. What other either words of wisdom or encouragement do you have for job changers?
I would definitely say don't give up. I think that you can get really down and out about the situation, especially when those rejections keep coming when you're applying for positions. Um, as I said, I went through a time where it seemed like every time I applied for something, there was some, sometimes I'd almost get to the end, and then there was some superstar who was just better than me in every other way, and they would get the position, and I just couldn't understand, like, why is this happening? Why can't I make this happen? So I would say don't give up. And then I would say the biggest thing is to gain that experience in any way you can. I wouldn't recommend necessarily doing it on your own, like I did with the blog and the novel. If you do that, it's for your personal experience, I think, unless it's a very professional thing. Like for me, it was a very personal thing. And so it was kind of hard to share it with people. So if you do something like that, I would say do it in a very professional way, maybe make some examples of things that you would write for business if you were asked to. But even better than that is making those connections with people, so that when it's time to have a reference for an interview, you've got those people in your back pocket who you've actually worked with, and they're, somebody in the business world that somebody can call up and say, oh, well, you work at XYZ and you worked with this person. Like, what did you do for them? Or what did they do for you? And you're really able to kind of um, prove what you can do. You're not just having it on a website. You're not just saying you can do it. Like somebody else is speaking for you, which I think is really important. The other thing is, if you can find a transition job, I think it's worth doing. I actually, when I made the transition to working with Jan as the transition job, it was a lateral move for me. So I didn't end up making any more money, which is what you want. I mean, you want that every time you move to a new job, you want to be able to make more. But for me, and actually in that position too, it was an 80% time job versus my job previously had been 100% time. So I was making less money for about a year and a half, a little over a year and a half. And I was in a position financially that I was able to do that. It wasn't great for my mental well-being, let's say, to see my W-4 or whatever at the end of the year and see that it was a lot less than I had made before. But to be honest, having a 3-day weekend was amazing. So that was one perk. And then obviously the other perk was being able to finally make the transition happen with that sort of intermediate job. So if you can do that, if you can afford to either take a lateral move or maybe a pay cut in order to move back up the ladder in the career you want, I think it's worth doing because otherwise sometimes it's really hard to break into some of those, first marketing positions. So, and then for me, like it ended up being like I ended up moving kind of up quickly once I was in the right path. Things moved fairly quickly. I think partly because I had done so much work ahead of time, like preparing myself for this, building up my skills, et cetera, that when I was finally given the chance, somebody said go, I was like, okay, I'm going. And then, within a couple of years, now I'm in the senior producer role. Whereas, when I was first started working for Jan, that was in 2016. I was doing the lateral position and I wasn't making a lot of money, but I think that's kind of what I got.
Yeah. Yeah. And also when you mentioned about the transition job, is really interesting how you sort of like organically did what sometimes in the career field called like a two-step process. You sort of did um, a hybrid two-step process. So if somebody, so um, uh, let's say administrative assistant, let's just say in higher ed, and let's say you wanted to be do marketing in healthcare, let's just say something like that. Typically, like a two-step process would be see if you can get an admin position in a healthcare organization, and then see if you can transition once you're in after a few years into a marketing position. That's one example of a two-step process. And you got kind of a interesting where it was in the same job, a two-step, like you had one foot in the old admin world and one foot into the world you were wanting to go in. So what another kind of transition, a great way to kind of ease your way in.
Yeah, I think for anybody who's in a admin role and looking for marketing, there are those positions where there's, admins that do marketing. For example, in extension, we have a bunch of admins and they do, they manage social media and they do some graphic design. I don't know if they do writing as much, but they do kind of have the ability to do some of those tasks. And I think too, like for me, like Jan knowing that I was good at those things meant that she was going to give me more to do. So kind of like being open with your supervisor about what you want, and then also proving the skills that you have can sort of bring those projects to you. And I think that's why I ended up getting sort of the promotion at Granite State College, moving into the role that was finally the right title, because they knew what my skills were. I mean, I wasn't expecting that to happen whatsoever. I didn't even really realize they were going to do a reorganization. But the fact that I had already proven myself and I had already written blogs for, their marketing team, and I had already been working on some graphic design projects for Jan. In particular, I taught myself at the time how to do some infographics, so charts and graphs and things like that. And so I made Jan like a really beautiful annual report for the career services team. And, it was shared with a bunch of people and it was in meetings on, PowerPoint screen, and it was out there. And so it was like, then your work gets to be known. People say, well, who did that? That looks great. So I think just being open to it and kind of proving your worth and taking on projects, where you can. So, me saying to Jan, what would be cool? Maybe we should do some infographics for this data that we have. And she was like, yeah, that'd be great. So then just kind of running with that.
I love it. And man, your story is a great example of um, this gentleman in the marketing field, Dean Jackson. He says something that I love. Demonstration beats presentation every time. So demonstrate results to a potential, whether it's employer or client or whatever, like do something for them that shows them how you can be helpful to them versus just trying to convince them you would be helpful. And so you have like example after example of you in jobs, like stretching your wings, producing a great result, and then how that positions you for your next step,
Right. Right.
including the cool infographic. That I
Right.
love that. That must be cool to see it in different presentations. Like I did that.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing too that's kind of interesting now that you mentioned that is that when I had the interview for extension, they had like a little assignment that they wanted me to do, which was to create some social media posts. And I just really wanted this to be like amazing and perfect. And so I took the time to not only, write social media posts and to look at the content that they gave me for them, but also to create graphics using my graphic design skills. And I think that's what cinched the job for me was the fact that, yeah, she can write some social media posts, but look at these graphics. Like these look amazing. And I think they were kind of blown away by that because they didn't have somebody in-house that was really doing a lot of graphic design for them. So kind of knowing that I had multiple skills, on different levels. And I think I must have also shared some writing samples with them, but I don't recall because I did a little bit of writing when I first started, but because I, became known slowly over time for graphic design, that's really built in that direction for my career now that I'm in extension. So
Very cool. Very cool. So you covered a lot in a short amount of time. Is there doesn't have to be, but is there any closing thoughts before we wind up for the person who's contemplating changing careers but's feeling kind of anxious?
I would say it's absolutely possible. This can happen. And I like looking back on myself, many years ago now, I don't think I ever would have imagined that I would be in this position. I used to sit there as an administrative assistant dreaming about, being UNH's graphic designer. And I'm not that yet, but I'm darn well on my way. So I got to say, like, if you stick to it, if you do all the right things, it's going to happen for you eventually. You can make it happen. It is in your control. Like maybe you won't get the exact first job you hoped for, but it is in your control to do all these things to build your experience and to move from one profession to another. So um, I'm so happy. All I can say is that I am so happy now, to be honest. Like, I'm so happy. I'm glad that I kind of knew what direction that I wanted to go in because these days work life is a dream for me compared to what it used to be. I used to be depressed and miserable every day. And now I am very, very happy every day with the work that I get to do. I have to pinch myself to be like, really? Really? Is this what you're doing? You get to do this fun stuff for work. They pay you to do this every single day. Like, you couldn't have told me years ago that it was possible to have a job where you would be happy and excited to go to work, but it does exist. It can happen. So
Thank you. Yeah, I love it. What a great way to end. Thank you so much. I'll stop the recording and then we can chat after. But thank you so much for, again, like a really info-packed interview detailing the really smart, intentional stuff that you did, and then ending off with like, it's so worth it. Like you can do it and it's so worth it. So thank you very much.
Oh, I'll have one last thing. Go talk to a career counselor. It will
There
change
you
your
go.
life. Please go talk to. You already are good.
Great recommendation. All right. Thanks, Sandra.
No problem.